It's Monday, the 15th of November 2021. Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, where we give you the top 5 business stories you need to know in just 5 minutes. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
All right, 5 stories in 5 minutes. Let's get into it. Story number 1, big one. The COP26 United Nations Climate Change Summit in Glasgow is over, with countries agreeing to phase down, but not phase out, coal mining.
Yes, in the final hours of hammering out a communique, India and China, two of the world's biggest emitters from coal-fired power stations, pushed the change in wording. It was a slightly disappointing end to the biggest climate summit in at least 5 years. The summit reached agreement on other significant issues, including how countries report their emissions and rules for global carbon markets. The Glasgow Accord commits the 197 parties to accelerate efforts towards a phase down of unabated coal power and phase out of inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. It's the first time a COP agreement has talked about fossil fuels. It commits countries to strengthen their 2030 emissions reduction targets by the end of next year and asks rich countries to double the money they're giving to developing countries to help them adapt. However, was it a success? That very much depends on who you ask. The UN Secretary Antonio Guterres probably put it best. He said the final agreement reflects the interests, conditions, the contradictions and the state of political will in the world today. In the end, the collective political will was not enough to overcome some deep contradictions.
Okay, as I said, big story. On to story number 2 today, and parents of young kids really holding out for a COVID vaccine might have to wait a little bit longer, Sean.
They will. Health Minister Greg Hunt said he expected medical regulators would decide in January whether 5 to 11-year-olds should be vaccinated against COVID-19. The Therapeutic Goods Administrator said it was waiting for more data from the US. The US, of course, is the only country so far to have approved vaccinations for children. And just quickly, Michael, the vaccination rollout has actually slowed in recent weeks. Do you know why? Because most people who want to be vaccinated have been.
Makes sense.
It does.
Okay, on to story number 3. And Sean, really, what a difference a couple of weeks can make. There were reports of shortages, would you believe it, of buyers in the housing market over the weekend.
Yes, that's right, Michael. And there was a shortage, particularly in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. New home listings in Sydney have jumped sharply over the last couple of weeks, but the average number of registered bidders has dropped to 3. Down from levels closer to 10, according to a report in the Financial Review. The main reason has been a flood of new listings. There were 1,290 auctions in Sydney over the weekend, the most since late March, and the clearance rate was down to 75%. Now, that's still not bad, but well below the level of early last month. In Melbourne, the clearance rate over the weekend was 74%, even though there was a jump in listings, but agents said fewer people were bidding at auctions and fewer were attending open houses. In Brisbane, the clearance rate was down 5 percentage points to 80%. Now, nationally, the clearance rate's about 76%. It's just come off the boil a bit.
Yeah, certainly has. On to story number 4, and you know that I love a good story about planes, and this one is a cracker.
Yes, everyone loves a good plane story. Now, Airbus said that airlines, leasing companies and cargo carriers will purchase more than 39,000 new passenger and freighter aircraft by 2040. That's 39,000 in the next 20 years. What's that? 2,000 a year. Basically, companies are demanding lower emissions planes. Over the weekend, the European plane maker said the COVID pandemic had stunted sales growth, but it expected a boom thanks to awareness around climate change. By the middle of this decade, it expects to be producing as many as 75 planes per month from its A320 family of jets alone. What an incredible comeback for a sector that 2 years ago everyone thought could die.
That is a remarkable recovery. Now, Sean, on to story number 5. And if you happen to be listening to this while wearing Lycra, grip the handlebars tightly because we've got some bad news.
Yep, the supply chain crisis is getting really serious. Bike parts, pedals, carbon frames, in fact, whole bikes, are in short supply globally. In fact, some parts have 12 to 18 months lead times, according to the Financial Times. Bike sales globally have soared during the pandemic. People have avoided public transport. They needed to get around. They jumped on their bike. That's added to the parts shortage. The men in Lycra out there are up in arms. They can't get their parts.
That is bad news indeed. And that is the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 15th of November, 2021. Remember to hit follow on the podcast. And if 5 minutes isn't enough, if you're after a bit more info, then you can find our longer podcast called Fear and Greed on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, where you can also sign up for our free daily newsletter. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was the Fear and Greed Business Headlines. Have a great day.